The deal. Adrian Cole had never believed in family. To him, children were shackles, messy interruptions that derailed ambition and clouded judgment. He had built his empire on precision. Every hour accounted for. Every relationship measured for utility. Warmth, tenderness, fatherhood. Those were illusions for weaker men. His wife, Elena, had once been an exception. She entered his life not as a partner chosen for passion, but as a strategic match. Beauty, elegance, refinement. She was a symbol of his success. For years, she had stood by him like an ornament polished for display at grand dinners and charity galas. Yet behind the flawless surface of their marriage was emptiness. Conversation between them had thinned to polite fragments. Touch was rare, intimacy rarer still. She lived in his house, but she did not live in his heart. It was on a rain-soaked evening, in a dimly lit office that smelled of leather and ink, that Adrian made the decision that would shatter their quiet detachment. He signed a contract, one not of business, but of acquisition. For daughters, young women with no choice of their own, became his responsibility overnight. When they arrived at the estate, silence followed them like a second skin. Mara, the eldest, carried a fire in her eyes, though she said nothing. Leora, with downcast gaze, seemed fragile as glass. Saren kept her distance, lips tight, her silence sharp enough to cut. And Kaya, the youngest, clung to shadows, a bird too small for the cage she now inhabited. Elena stood in the grand hall as they entered, her breath caught between pity and disbelief. "Adrian," she whispered, "what have you done?" He shrugged, his tone cold. "I've provided them stability. They'll want for nothing here." "Nothing," Elena repeated softly, staring at the four figures, except freedom. The air between them thickened, as though the mansion itself recognized the weight of her words. Adrian dismissed her with a look, but something inside him shifted, however faintly. He had bought obedience, silence, and presence, but not one of them lowered their head in gratitude. The daughters were not children in need of rescue. They were souls pressed into stillness. That night, the house changed. Where there had once been polished corridors filled only with the echo of Adrian's shoes, there were now footsteps that did not belong to him. The scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to the stairwell. The dining room, once set for two, stretched awkwardly around 6. And still, no one spoke freely. Elena felt the tension most keenly. In their silence, she sensed unspoken stories, fears carried in their posture, pain behind their eyes. She wanted to ask them questions, but under Adrian's watchful gaze, her voice faltered. He treated them as extensions of his will, as if by purchasing them he had erased their individuality. But in the stillness of their faces, Elena glimpsed resistance. Mara's fleeting glare when Adrian turned his back. Saren's clenched hands beneath the table. Kaya's restless shifting as though her skin could not bear confinement. One evening, as the storm raged outside, Elena lingered in the hallway, watching Adrian at his desk. His focus remained unbroken, eyes scanning ledgers, signing papers as if nothing beyond his work existed. The four daughters sat in the adjoining room, shadows among velvet drapes. Elena felt torn in two directions, toward the man she had sworn to, and toward the silent strangers who now lived within their walls. That night, she dared to whisper to them. "You are safe here," she said, though even as the words left her lips, she doubted them. Mara's eyes lifted, sharp and questioning. Leora nodded faintly, as though politeness was all she had left to offer. Saren remained unreadable. Kaya, barely awake, leaned against her sister's shoulder. Elena withdrew, heart unsettled. She realized that the balance of their household had shifted forever. She was no longer merely the neglected wife of a powerful man. She was now custodian of 4 lives, each bearing invisible wounds. And in that fragile connection, something stirred in her, a longing, a defiance, a quiet recognition that her life was no longer only her own. Adrian, however, saw none of it. To him, the deal was done. He had acquired what he wanted, silent figures who filled the spaces of his home without demanding love or affection. He did not yet see the danger, the way silence can turn into rebellion, or how emptiness can awaken desire in the most unexpected of places. The storm outside faded into night. The mansion settled into uneasy stillness, but within its walls, the first fissure had formed. Adrian believed he had bought control. Elena, staring into the darkness beside her, knew otherwise. This was only the beginning. Forbidden fire. The mansion had always been a place of polished silence, but now it carried a different weight. It was no longer the silence of wealth or control, but of people who could not speak what pressed against their hearts. Adrian remained unchanged in his habits. Early mornings consumed by reports, afternoons of meetings that never ended, evenings spent behind his office doors. He moved through the house like a monarch ruling a conquered land, aware of its occupants but never concerned with their inner lives. Elena, however, could not look away. The daughters unsettled her in ways she could not yet explain. They ate carefully, every movement calculated, as if any slip might bring unseen punishment. Their eyes carried more stories than their lips would ever tell, and Elena, once accustomed to her own quiet suffering, felt compelled to draw closer. Mara was the first to resist invisibility. The eldest carried herself with an edge that felt almost dangerous. She did not lower her eyes in Adrian's presence, and though she said nothing, her silence was different from her sister's. It was a challenge, a refusal to bow. Elena noticed it immediately. She found herself lingering on Mara's expression during dinner, tracing the tension in her jaw, the fire hidden behind restraint. One evening, after Adrian had retired to his study, Elena wandered toward the east balcony. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving the night air heavy and damp. There, she found Mara standing alone, staring into the distance as though searching for an escape. "You shouldn't stand in the chill," Elena said softly. Mara turned, her eyes narrowing before softening. "It's better than suffocating indoors," she murmured, voice quiet but sharp with meaning. The word struck Elena like a confession. It was the first time any of them had spoken so openly in her presence. For a moment, she hesitated, caught between comfort and caution. "Does he frighten you?" she asked carefully. Mara's lips curved, not in a smile but something darker. "He doesn't frighten me. He disgusts me." Elena's breath caught. No one had ever spoken of Adrian with such candor, not even herself. And yet, hearing it from Mara's lips felt like a release, as though someone had voiced the thought she had carried for years. From that night forward, their meetings became quiet rituals. Elena would find excuses to wander into the garden, the balcony, the library, spaces where Mara would appear as if drawn by the same unspoken need. Their conversations were brief, cautious, but layered with tension. Each word carried weight. Each glance lingered longer than propriety allowed. It was not love, not yet, but it was something more dangerous, recognition. Elena saw in Mara a reflection of herself, trapped, unacknowledged, longing for freedom denied by Adrian's grip. And in that recognition, desire began to take root. Meanwhile, Adrian remained blind to the shifting currents beneath his roof. He noticed only fragments. The way Elena seemed less eager to sit with him at meals, the way Mara's gaze sometimes lingered too long in his presence. He dismissed these details, convinced that control was unshakable. But Saren had noticed. Quiet, calculating Saren, who observed more than she revealed. She saw Elena's footsteps slow whenever Mara entered a room, saw the way their silences brushed against one another like sparks in the dark. Though she said nothing, her watchfulness carried weight, a silent threat waiting to awaken. For Elena, guilt mingled with exhilaration. She told herself she was only offering kindness, that Mara's company filled a void left by years of neglect. But kindness did not explain the way her pulse quickened at the brush of a hand, or the warmth she felt when Mara's defiance softened only for her. One night, when the household had quieted, Elena lingered outside the study where Adrian worked. The sound of his pen scratching paper filled the hall, relentless, unfeeling. Behind her, a shadow moved, Mara carrying a candle. Their eyes met, and for the briefest moment, it was as though the world shrank to just the two of them. "Can't sleep?" Elena whispered. Mara shook her head, stepping closer. The candlelight flickered across her face, painting her features in fire and shadow. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. The air between them tightened, heavy with what remained unsaid. Elena turned away first, her heart racing. She told herself it was nothing, that the line between them had not yet been crossed. But as she returned to her room, the truth pressed against her chest. She wanted more. In the darkness of her bed, with Adrian asleep beside her, Elena's thoughts lingered not on her husband, but on the defiant flame in Mara's eyes. The conflict had begun, and though she did not yet admit it aloud, Elena knew she was already standing at the edge of betrayal. The breaking point. Elena had always known her marriage was hollow, but she had never imagined how quickly emptiness could transform into temptation. The walls of the mansion, once suffocating with silence, now held whispers, glances, and secret footsteps. Each day with Mara drew her further from the cold orbit of her husband and closer to a dangerous intimacy that both thrilled and terrified her. Mara did not seek affection like her sisters. She did not shrink into obedience, nor did she beg for comfort. Instead, she carried her silence like a blade, sharp and controlled, revealing only what she chose. Yet with Elena, something cracked. In hushed conversations beneath the cloak of night, Mara's hardness softened, revealing the raw ache of a young woman who had never been allowed choice, never been seen beyond her defiance. Their meetings grew bolder. In the library, Elena's fingers would linger too long on a page Mara handed her. In the garden, the brush of a hand across Elena's wrist sent a current racing through her body. Words that began as sympathy slipped into something hungrier, spoken with the trembling weight of secrets too fragile to endure light. For Elena, every stolen moment was both salvation and sin. She had been starving for connection, and in Mara she found not only recognition but fire. Her heart, long buried beneath Adrian's indifference, now beat with reckless urgency. Yet each time she returned to her husband's side, guilt pressed heavily against her chest. She slept beside him with her body still warm from Mara's nearness, wondering how long the lie could survive. Adrian, though blind to the full truth, was not a fool. He began to notice the shifts. The way Elena no longer sought his approval, the faint color in her cheeks after evenings spent away from him. He noticed, too, how Mara's gaze sometimes lingered with defiance, how Elena's hand would hover near hers as though drawn by an invisible thread. At first, Adrian dismissed it as nonsense, an invention of his weary mind. But suspicion is a seed that requires little water. Soon, he found himself watching them more closely, his cold detachment thinning into something sharper. The other daughters felt the tension as well. Leora grew quieter, carrying unease in her every movement. Kaya clung to her sisters for reassurance, too young to understand but old enough to sense danger. Saren, however, watched with keen, calculating eyes. She noticed the subtle changes in her eldest sister's posture, the softened tone of Elena's voice, the secret looks exchanged when Adrian was distracted. Where others saw coincidence, Saren saw pattern. One evening, Elena slipped into the garden long after the house had gone still. The moonlight spilled across marble pathways, and there, by the rose trellis, Mara waited. Elena's pulse quickened as she approached. "You shouldn't be here," Elena whispered, though her voice carried no conviction. "Neither should you," Mara replied, her lips curving faintly. They stood close enough that Elena could feel the warmth of her breath, the dangerous pull between them. Her hand lifted almost of its own accord, brushing against Mara's cheek. For a moment, time stilled, two women bound not by circumstance, but by a forbidden yearning that no vow could erase. The kiss, when it came, was tentative yet fierce, a breaking of chains that neither had realized weighed so heavily. It was not the tender affection of safety, but the desperate collision of two souls starved for freedom. Elena pulled back first, trembling, her heart racing as though it might betray her aloud. "This is wrong," she whispered, though her body still leaned toward Mara. "It's the only thing that feels right," Mara answered. Those words echoed through Elena long after she returned to her room. Adrian lay beside her, asleep, unaware that the woman he claimed as his own now belonged, in secret, to another. She stared at the ceiling, torn between terror and elation. Yet secrecy cannot remain hidden forever. Saren's sharp eyes had caught enough to confirm what she suspected. She said nothing yet, but her silence held weight, and Elena sensed it. At the breakfast table, she caught Saren's gaze, steady and unblinking, as though daring her to deny what was unfolding. Adrian, too, began asking subtle questions. "You've been restless," he remarked one evening, his voice smooth but edged with suspicion. "The nights keep you awake?" Elena forced a smile, steady but brittle. Perhaps the storms. But it was not the storms that rattled her. It was the flame she had kindled, one that burned brighter with each passing day, one that threatened to consume everything she had known. By the end of that week, Adrian could no longer ignore the change in his home. He watched his wife with eyes no longer indifferent, but searching, and what he saw unsettled him deeply. The woman who had once been his silent companion was slipping from his grasp, and though he did not yet know into whose arms, he knew a betrayal was near. The air in the mansion thickened, heavy with tension, secrets, and unspoken desires. Elena carried her guilt like a cloak, Mara her defiance like armor, Adrian his suspicion like a sharpened blade. The quiet facade of the household was cracking, and the truth pressed ever closer to the surface. And somewhere in the silence, Saren prepared to decide whether to protect her sister's secret or expose it. Consequences of desire. The night air carried the faint scent of roses, heavy and intoxicating. In the garden, beneath the pale wash of moonlight, Elena stood with Mara. Their hands lingered together, fingers woven tightly as though the world itself might pull them apart if they loosened their grip. For Elena, the moment felt fragile and infinite, a shard of freedom carved from a life of silence. But freedom rarely comes without cost. Adrian's voice broke the stillness. "So this is what you've become." The words fell like a stone into water, rippling outward with fury. Elena spun around, her breath stolen, while Mara did not flinch. The defiance in her eyes flared brighter, refusing to bend even under Adrian's gaze. "Elena," he said, his voice low and sharp, "you stand in my house, in my garden, holding her as if I do not exist." Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to turn away, but the truth had already been laid bare. "You never existed," she whispered, the words trembling but resolute. "Not as a husband, not as a man who could love." Adrian's jaw clenched, his composure fracturing. He had spent his life mastering control, over business, over image, over Elena herself. Yet here, before him, was proof that control could slip, that even possession could be wrested away. Mara stepped forward, shielding Elena with the smallest gesture. "She belongs to no one," she said, her voice calm but searing. "Not to you. Not anymore." For a moment, silence pressed down on all three, heavy as stone. Adrian's pride battled with something he had long buried, fear, not of losing Elena, but of admitting that he had never truly had her. "You think this ends well?" he snarled. "You think betrayal is freedom? You know nothing of the world, girl." Mara's eyes narrowed. "And you know nothing of love." The words landed with the finality of a verdict. Adrian's face hardened, but behind his anger flickered something more dangerous, recognition. He had dismissed love as weakness, rejected fatherhood, rejected tenderness. Yet in doing so, he had created the very emptiness that drove Elena into Mara's arms. Elena's voice, though quiet, carried the weight of years unsaid. "You made this house a cage, Adrian. You left me to wither in silence. For once, I chose something that was mine. That is what you cannot forgive. Not the betrayal, but the choice. Her confession cut deeper than any infidelity. It stripped him of the illusion that his empire could shield him from loss. He had believed loyalty could be bought, silence enforced. Yet here stood Elena, no longer silent, no longer his. For the first time in his life, Adrian faltered. He looked at Elena, not as a possession, but as the woman he had ignored, the partner he had refused to see. And in her eyes, there was no fear left, only sorrow and determination. "You would throw away everything for this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, frayed at the edges. Elena met his gaze steadily. Everything was already gone. The truth was undeniable. The marriage had rotted long before Mara entered their lives. The daughters had not broken their bond. They had revealed the hollowness of what never truly existed. Adrian stepped back, his anger drained into something colder, solitude. He could punish, he could exile, he could rage, but none of it would restore what had been lost. For the first time, he understood regret, though too late to change its course. Elena turned to Mara, her hand steady as it closed around hers once more. "We leave at dawn," she whispered, though Adrian could hear her. The decision was final, carved into the silence that followed. The four daughters gathered at the threshold of the garden, drawn by the commotion. Leora's eyes brimmed with cautious hope. Kaya clung to her sister's arm, and Saren watched with her usual calculating calm. None spoke, but all understood. The balance of power had shifted. Adrian stood alone in the moonlight as they withdrew, his figure stark against the pale stone walls. For years, he had claimed he wanted no children, no family, no entanglements of love. Yet as the figures disappeared into the shadows of the house, he felt the weight of absence heavier than ever before. He had gained everything a man could own: wealth, influence, control. Yet in the end, he had lost the one thing he had never valued until it was gone: connection. The garden returned to silence, broken only by the rustle of leaves. Adrian remained rooted, hollow, and unyielding, haunted by the truth that his empire was vast but empty, and that love, once denied, could not be reclaimed. This was the consequence of desire, not passion itself, but the price of ignoring it until it burned the world down.